Honey, do you want to get the door? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Kevin got it. All right. I got my glass put back in my truck just today. That's been an ordeal been driving around with plastic tape on the back of my truck since December 21st. So that tells you how long it's been. And got to get the thing really good now because to get the glass changed, I got all my tools from underneath the seat. When I did that the other day, there was like this much water in both little like trays where the tools go, down in all that carpet. So the people that hit us or cause all the damage, they had State Farm. I have State Farm. You think you get preferential treatment? That's really good. I'm paying about $200 a month now. What I'm paying. So. Every 6 months? Yeah. Professional. I'll have to check that out. All right, well. You never know what you're going to learn on a Wednesday night, checking out how to save yourself $800 every 6 months. So, praise the Lord for that.
Also, with my home, I've been with this same homeowner
Yeah.
years. And it saved me, I think it's right at $1,600.
So you bundled them? Your home and auto with the same people? It's called Professional?
Professional.
Okay, I'm going to check them out. Thank you, Charlie. All right. Anyhow, welcome tonight. We're going to get into our Bible study on the book of Acts. And wonder if anybody here enjoys a good mystery. Good mystery, whether it's a book or a movie. Stories that are full of intrigue. You wonder, what's going to happen. I'm kind of drawn to those type of genre. I like those kind of movies like the suspenseful type movies, the kind of mysterious type movies. Matter of fact, a couple of years ago, when Ben and Katie lived here, we had a murder dinner party, and we all dressed up. Wasn't that a murder dinner party, or was it just a costume? I can't remember. Yeah, that's what I thought. We all dressed up as different characters and stuff, and then we had to, solve a murder, mystery. And then we did one at Northside. What? Yeah, it was at a pizzeria, so it was like an Italian dinner theme. And then we went to one at Northside one year where they had a murder mystery dinner party, and it was the same kind of thing. You had to, listen to the clues and try to figure out who did it as the kids were up there doing the kind of play thing. You tried to figure out who was the guilty party. And usually in those cases, they don't tell you the whole story, right? You kind of get introduced to each character. One character, and you kind of listen to what they have to say and hear their story, kind of see their perspective, and then it goes to the next one. And
we like those games, you get the box and you open up the packages inside.
Yeah.
You get to follow a mystery.
Yeah, that's like the whole game is like one big challenge, one big mystery. Well, Acts 23 kind of reads like that. It reads like kind kind of a mystery or a movie, because each time there's like a new character introduced, or even a group of characters that are introduced, there's a kind of a new perspective offered, and sometimes even a new deception. So it's kind of lets us know what's going on. So tonight, we're going to call this lesson Cast of Characters as we look at chapter 23. I know we left off on 22, and we didn't finish with verse 30, but just to summarize what's going on, chapter 22, we left off where Paul was wanting to speak to his countrymen, trying to communicate to them, his testimony and, who he was, where he had been, and what God had done with him, and, how he met the Lord, his testimony, and where God was taking him. And when he couldn't communicate with them through that means, and we talked about the kind of the challenge, or the two groups, if you will, those that were like more for the law side of things, and those that were more on the grace side of things, and Paul was that champion for grace. And well, remember right there at the end of chapter 22, Paul was getting ready to be torn apart, because the people were they were getting ready, this kind of angry mob had worked up into a frenzy to where they were tearing their clothes, and they were getting ready to, destroy Paul. And that's whenever the commander brought Paul into the barracks, and the commander was like, "Listen, what is the deal? I mean, why are they after you so badly? What is this that they're accusing you of?" And so the commander's wanting to know what's going on. He's trying to figure out what is happening, and so he decides to have an opportunity where Paul can sit down, and the next day when everybody kind of calms down, he can sit down with the leaders, the religious leaders of the Jews, can sit down, and Paul can they can work this out. He's hoping that they'll be able to work it out among themselves. And remember, the commander's already protecting Paul now, because he realizes that he is a Roman citizen, and no matter what necessarily they're accusing him of, it doesn't permit Paul to be tried or to be just taken and anything done to him, because he's a Roman citizen, he has rights. So the commander has to look after his rights as a Roman citizen. And so that's kind of where we are in the story. And then we're going to pick it up in Acts chapter 23 with the first character that we're introduced to in this story, and that's Ananias, the high priest. Now remember, high priests were, they were assigned or elected, if you will, to this position, to this role. And they would serve a while, and then they would, oftentimes they would give up that position. But there were many high priests, and but for each synagogue, for each area, there would be one high priest that would be over all the religious leaders of this area. And so Ananias was that high priest over Jerusalem, okay? And I want you to notice that we find in verses 1 through 5, "Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council," that's these religious leaders, "said, 'Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day.' And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, 'God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. For you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law?' And those who stood by said, 'Do you revile God's high priest?' Then Paul said, 'I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people.'" So, obviously there was a law that you weren't to disrespect the leader of the people, the leader of the religious leader. So you weren't to speak evil of them. And Paul, was just, he didn't, Paul Paul was speaking his heart to these people, but he didn't say anything that deserved, in Paul's opinion, to be slapped, because he didn't think he was speaking anything out of the way. And so he was kind of caught in the situation. But here's Ananias, the high priest, who literally, as Paul begins to speak, almost opening his mouth, the high priest, and he's not even worthy to speak. No, we know what he's... In other words, he was guilty before he ever spoke. Before he pleaded his case, he was guilty. And that's not God's way, obviously. If you read the Bible, even the Old Testament, that's not God's way. God is not in that way. He's all merciful, He's loving, He's compassionate. And so to find that he doesn't even hear out Paul, and this is where we find Ananias the high priest kind of setting the stage for what is to come. So here's Paul realizing now that he is, he's kind of got the world against him. This whole group is at, kind of holding him in contempt. And notice what happens as the next group's introduced, which is the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Notice verses 6 through 9. And when Paul perceived that one and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Then there arose a loud outcry, and the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, "We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." So Paul actually was genius in what he said, okay? Because as soon as he realized, okay, there's two groups here. There's the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And in the Scriptures, we realize and we learn that the Sadducees were, the Pharisees and Sadducees were the religious leaders, the Jewish religious hierarchy. Okay? All subject to the high priest, but they were in this kind of different hierarchies, if you will, two different groups. And the Pharisees believed in resurrection. So they believed in resurrection. There's going to be, spirits and angels and these kind of things that are real. And the Sadducees didn't believe in that. And so to them, there were no spirit. There was no afterlife like spiritual afterlife. And so for them to see, for Paul to talk about this Jesus who had spoken to him as resurrected from the dead, the Sadducees did not like that. But the Pharisees were all on board. They could not condemn him and said, "It's possible for you to have somebody that's resurrected from the dead speak to you," then they would be going to their own belief. And it would make them look bad. That's one of the things they took pride in, that they believed in. So that's where this contention, this kind of division took place. And so now you have them arguing among themselves. So it's like, some people are instigators, and Paul just kind of instigated it, and then stepped back and then watched all this, mayhem ensue. And so then they had all these arguments going back and forth between the two groups of leaders. And finally, someone spoke up and said, "Hey, if this man says he's heard somebody speak to him from the dead, then how can we argue with him? Whether it's a spirit or an angel, how can we argue with that?" Because we'd be arguing against God. We'd be fighting against God. And so, again, we see, this intervention, if you will, in this situation against Paul, which we see over and over again, where Paul would be and this somehow he gets out of it in a certain way. But it starts kind of heating up. Things are getting kind of bad. And then the next character, which we really already know. At the end of this chapter, you learn his name. This is the Roman commander. He'd been questioning Paul. He was the one who ordered him to be thong-tied and have him whipped and questioned. He realized he was a Roman citizen and released to safe. He's the one who allowed. Now here he is, Claudius Lysias, the Roman commander. He says in verse here lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them. Force bringing into the barracks. Once again, this commander is bringing Paul into the barracks to keep him safe and to keep him from being able to, to protect him as a Roman citizen. That was his duty, to protect the citizens of Rome. So that's what he was doing. He was just doing his duty as a soldier, which we already talked about last week. We know this guy more than likely has served over 5 years in the Roman military. That's how he obtained his citizenship. Why Paul was born into Rome, born a citizen. His mother and his father were Roman citizens. So this is where you see Claudius Lysias. So we see the Ananias, the high priest. We see the different religious leaders, Sadducees and the Pharisees. Now, it's the Jews that are taking an oath. We're going to read about them in verses 12 through 15. And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. And there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him. But we are ready to kill him before he comes near." So you got these 40 Jews that are not associated with like the Pharisees or the Sadducees. They're not that group. They're Jews that have taken an oath, and it was a serious thing. By law, an oath was made between. So listen to how absurd this is, okay? They're making an oath to God. We're going to make this oath before God that we will kill this man, okay? And it just sounds crazy. And for what? Because the man has said that he, talked to Jesus, who was resurrected from the dead. And he believes that, Christ has brought us a greater gospel, a greater freed us from the law, and made it so that we wouldn't have to be bound by that law which we cannot keep. This is what the Jews were mad at Paul about, because he was saying they discredited the law, that he discredited the law, that he dishonored the law. This is the same man that just taken oath himself, right? He'd shaven his head and all. He'd done what, he was even to his culture and to his own kind of heritage. He was holding true to that, showing himself faithful to it, but at the same time, they weren't buying it. And so this group wants him dead, and they are taking it to such extreme that they said, "We will neither eat nor drink till we kill him." And so they come up with this plan that they ask the religious leaders, "Hey, if you'll go to the commander and ask to see him and ask to have him meet another meeting like you just had." And this will be the third time that they will have questioned Paul. But this time, whenever they're bringing Paul out, we'll be waiting to ambush him, and we will kill him. Okay? And so that's what's going on here as these Jews are conspiring to murder Paul. Now notice, while this is all happening, son. Look at verses 16 to 22. So when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, "Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you, and he has something to say to you." Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will eat nor drink till they have killed him. Now they are ready and waiting for the promise from you." So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, "Tell no one that you have revealed these things to me." Now, a couple things here. First of all, let's back up a minute by this taking of oath. It goes to show you just how kind of twisted people can be when it comes to their religious beliefs. You know, we think about taking an airplane and crashing people or bomb to their chest and walk into, a building and just blow themselves up because they know that they're going to kill a bunch of people. And they do that out of, they say because of their religion, right? People do these kind of things all the time, and it might be, Islam, or it might be some other religion, or it might be some kind of, crazy off-the-wall, religion, or extremism that they're living for, some kind of doctrine that they live their life by. But it goes to show you that between let's say following taking God's law and making it work for your situation or your own plan, whatever you want to do, your own agenda. And so the Jews were taking an oath, but they weren't doing it according to the law. They weren't doing it according to God's way because they wanted to murder a man who wasn't guilty of murder. He hadn't been tried. He hadn't been accused. He hadn't been processed and condemned. At least Jesus was condemned. They had the witnesses, and they had the court, and they had the governor who said, I washed my hand of it, and then he gave the order. They kind of went through the process with Jesus. Here they just wanted we're just going to go ahead and just kill Paul before he even gets an opportunity to be processed. So thank God, there was the commander who stepped in to kind of watch after him. But then these guys, are going to go ahead and conspire to kill him. Well, Paul's nephew, his sister's son, hears about it. Now, read that and think. What does that make his sister? Roman citizen, right? And more likely because was a Roman citizen, so that makes him a Roman citizen. So he's a Roman citizen. So he has, rights to, and plus he probably realizes he's family. And, they were, at this point, they're probably letting Paul see his family. And so here, they let him come in, and he finds out about this, and he tells Paul, and Paul, in turn, tells him to take the news to the commander, because it's the commander who can do something about it. It's not Paul. Paul can't do anything about it, but he goes through the right channels. He takes it up through the right channels and gets it to the guy in charge. And so they find out about it, and they kind of keep it kind of secret on the lowdown because the commander wants to handle this in the most kind of covert way. Because again, what is his job? What is this commander's job here in Jerusalem? Keep the peace. That's what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to not interfere with the Jewish kind of culture, the activities. They were happy because they paid their taxes. Everybody's good, right? Everybody wins. It's a win-win. You can do your religious ceremonies. You can do your religious deals. All that kind of stuff. You can live your life how you want to live. As long as you pay your taxes and, keep the peace, everything's good. Follow the rules, so to speak. We'll let you do your own thing. We'll do our own thing, and everybody's happy. And so this is kind of what he wants to happen with Paul. Notice what happens here as we introduce to the next character, which is Felix, who is governor of Caesarea. All right, let's look at verses 23 to 35. And he called for 2 centurions, saying, prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on, and bring him safely to Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter in the following manner. Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. And I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving death or chains. And when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. Then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. And the next day they left the horsemen to go on with him and returned to the barracks. And when they came to Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor. And they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he understood he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear you when your accusers also have come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. All right, so I don't know if you all noticed this, but when I read that letter, first of all, I thought, that's pretty cool that Luke was able to get his hands on this letter, right? That here's a letter that was written from another high-ranking official in the Roman government, and Luke was able to get his hands on it to copy it word for word, almost scribe it down in the Bible. Okay? Did none of y'all just pick up on that? I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, first of all. Second of all, his letter is bogus. Okay? Did he do all that stuff? He made himself sound like a champion, didn't he? He made himself sound like a boss. He messed that up from the day one. He was always reactive. The letter sounds like he was very proactive, doesn't it? It said like, man, I knew that I took this guy, I saw he was about to get harmed. I took him into custody. I found out, I inquired what was going on with him. I was in control the whole time. No, that's not what happened. He had him out there, and Paul says, hey, let me talk to these guys. Well, go ahead and talk to them. And then he realized, oh man, you can't let you talk to him. Bring him in here. And he's like, well, I'm going to go ahead and beat you so I can... I'm going to start beating you. And then he says, I'm a Roman citizen. Oh, I can't beat him. He's a Roman citizen. So he messed it up from day one, but, he's making it sound like, oh, I got it all in control down here. Don't think that I'm not, messing things up over here. I got it in control. So, and it kind of goes back, you and I would do the same thing. We wouldn't list out all our mistakes if we're, writing a letter to our boss. We'd probably embellish it, make it sound, we'll leave out all the bad stuff. We'll leave out all that trial and error stuff. We're going to just tell our highlights of what we did. And so he sends this letter to Felix, and he's not taking any. All the guards Do you see the hardware? Do you see the soldiers? I mean, he's like, I'm putting everything. We're going to do everything we can. I'm not losing this guy. I'm not going to have him killed. Because if he does have him killed, man, it's going to look bad for him. And so he says, I'm not messing this up. So they say it's 40-something guys. We don't know. There's a lot of Jews. There is a lot of Jews. Now, eventually, if you read on into history, you know, you read back into history, I guess, not from this point forward, but years down the road, there will be a revolt of the Jews. There will be a lot of Jews and a lot of people be killed, and they'll kill a lot of Jews too. And so that actually happened. I think it was like in 70 AD or something like that. And that's when Titus decided to just wreck the temple. And he said, well, I'm just going to make sure there's not a stone unturned. He said, let's just tear up even the foundation. And so they just tore everything down and destroyed the whole temple. And from that point on, there's not been a temple. And there won't be a temple built. And there won't be another temple until God rebuilds the temple in the millennium. So just like a little lesson ahead of time. But anyway, Felix is the governor of Caesarea. It's about about a day's journey away. And they, take Paul through the night. They leave about 9 o'clock at night, so it's under the cover of darkness. They go out with all these soldiers. They go to a neighboring town, and then they kind of drop Paul off there with half of them. Half of them return back. The Jews wouldn't have suspected anything was happening because often, there would be these kind of caravans of soldiers that would go back and forth from these various towns outside of Jerusalem to Caesarea, where there was more of a Roman province, more of a Roman-controlled province, versus Jerusalem, that have a lot more Jews. And so here is a lot more liberal kind of setting, and wouldn't be as much of the Jewish heat, if you will. And so he pushes him off to Felix. And so Felix is questioning Paul and says, who you are, and wants to know where he's from. And he says, well, I'll hear you out, once your accusers get here. And it kind of takes the heat off of, the Roman there in Jerusalem, Claudius, and it leads it to Felix. So that's kind of where we are in the whole situation. But we left one very important character out. And left it out on purpose. And that's back in verse 11. And that's, okay? Which he was through the whole story. If we know he's always through the story. I want you to notice tonight the Lord so you must also bear witness at Rome. You know what God was saying, Paul? You've been through a bunch of stuff, and you've been faithful to me. But don't worry. You're going to be faithful to me. You're going to keep on going, and just as you've testified here, you're going to be able to testify even before Caesar in Rome. You're going to go all the way to the top. You're going to take this thing to the top. So when Paul just heard about, them moving him, he's like, man, we're just moving to the next step. I just get a new audience. I get a new people, somebody else to testify to. Each time, Paul's going to get a chance to get a little bit higher up the ladder. And eventually he will get to appear before the highest authority in the land. But it just goes to show you that God was in control all along. He has been in control of the whole story there. And oftentimes, we look at mysteries and we try to figure out, we see the character and say, oh, that's the person who's done it. And then you see a new character and you say, oh, no, that's the person that's done it. Oh, this character. And then sometimes right at the end, you're like, oh, man, I never saw that coming. And it was like God was in control of this the whole time, even though we may not have seen it. It was God all along. So as we listen to that story and we see what Paul went through, two things kind of pop out to my mind. First of all, we need to thank God for men and women like Paul who stood for truth, who stood in the face of danger, who weren't afraid to step up and speak out and spread the gospel of grace. Because if it weren't for people like Paul, we wouldn't be here today. It's only because of people like him who would kind of go where others only dared to go, that we wouldn't have the gospel today. So thank God for them. But then trust God. Because today we are the Pauls. We are the people who are going. We're those people who are charged with the duty to carry forth the gospel, to spread the gospel, the good news to others. And that may mean that we'll face some dangers. We might face some harm and some struggles and some hardships. But when that day comes, I pray that we'll stand strong and we'll speak up, because who knows who will be able to say one day, thank God for us, and be able to look back and say, because of us, because we stood strong, because we trusted God. And that's where you have to ultimately trust God, that He's going to protect you, He's going to take care of you, and He's going to see you through. And that's the only way you can make it. Paul knew what he was getting himself into. Remember back in Jerusalem, chapter 20? Paul, you go here, you're going to be arrested. Paul, you go here, you're going to be killed. Paul, this is... He said, I'm already ready to go. Even if it means death, I'm ready to go, to tell the good news. And so that's kind of how we have to resolve in our own lives, and hopefully we can. All right, we're going to go take prayer requests now and wrap up our time together. So if you have a prayer request you would like to share with us, if you're online, we would love to be able to share, pray with you over those requests. Just leave those requests either on our website or in the comment section there below the video, and we will pray for you. And until the next time, may the Lord bless you always. Hopefully, real soon.